important asset in the Florentine metropolitan area. And finally, the paper environmental and landscape constraints and legislative provisions in territorial urban planning and building construction, impacts in urban regeneration, analyzes the relationship between the complexity in territorial government and economic feasibility of regeneration initiative. I hope you will enjoy this session. Then, after this short lunch, this short start of our session, I will proceed with the contribution of Saverio Torsoni, starting from urban scale. Please, Saverio, you can share your presentation.
Good morning, yes.
17 minutes, and after your speech, 3 minutes for questions.
Yeah. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. The present research starts from the collaboration between the University of Florence and the Municipality of Fondi, a locality in the Lazio region, for the purpose of creating the knowledge framework which will be the first step in drafting the new general variant of the current municipal plan, dating back to the 1978. The general variant, which basically consists of a new municipal plan replacing the current one, defined from the outset the importance of the knowledge framework, which, in this context, will have the burden of defining and directing future choices and transformations on the territory. In order to succeed in understanding and hinging together the different phases that make up the territory, the principles of study and representation proposed by regional design have proved fundamental. This discipline, born as a reaction to the now manifest inability of large-scale plans to respond to the new needs of the population and territories, bases its processes on the awareness that administrative borders, within which as a rule, the plans of classical setting impose and define their directives, poorly dialogue with all those flows that animate the territory within them, transport system, water, energy, etc. Regional design also introduces the need to know and interpret all those immaterial aspects and values peculiar to each place, of which they constitute the identity and which then, in the place, manifest themselves with more or less spontaneous and material transformations. Thanks to this type of reading, each territory is enriched with dignity and value, now that it's no longer seen in its singularity and in comparison mostly competitive with other singularities, but in its specific roles and positions in relation to a far more complex mosaic of territorial mechanisms. So, a research modality with an holistic approach is proposed, as suggested by the practices of regional design. This discipline aims, in fact, to tell the interconnections between the different parts, giving each one equal value and prominence, so that they can finally concert in a set of strategic visions for future development. The knowledge framework, thus, is composed of insights with blurred edges that, however, are based on analysis with defined boundaries. The certainty of the location of a territorial element is matched by the uncertainty of its use, amalgamating these two levels of analysis with themes such as vocation or potentialities. By confronting the macrostructure and subplots, material and immaterial of Municipality of Fondi, the research seeks to bring out the pieces of which the territory is composed, their overlaps and the exchange dynamics. In Lazio, the drafting of a knowledge framework is regulated by a departmental act of year 2000, which, as can be seen from the image, requires a set of analyses proposed in a varied order and degree of detail, apparently without a coherent and univocal organization. Given the importance of this document and the substantial generality of the conventionally required analysis, it was decided to reformulate the composition of the knowledge framework, aware that an appropriate territorial study can be said to be such only if it is conducted through specific analysis, measured on the peculiarities of the area. Moreover, a thorough and ramified study of the territory represents an opportunity for multiple new purposes, not only for administration, but also for citizens and all the stakeholders, sorry, who in this document could trace a useful tool for dissemination and for the strengthening of collective identity. But not only for that, by this tool, by studying the historical processes and transformation, planned or spontaneous, must also provide the opportunity to reflect on on the territory and, as a consequence, to orientate the research, channeling the future decisions on the territory towards specific directions, consistent with the different mechanisms that animate the municipality, being them social, natural, or economical. So, methodologically, following the principles listed above, four thematic systems were identified, where the 19 analyses required were relocated and distributed now in a coherent order. Then, this new distribution made it possible to easily identify the gaps that each system of analysis had, and so to understand which in-depth studies were needed for the formulation of a comprehensive and performant knowledge framework, especially for the next decision-making phase. The number of papers so increased from 19 to 42, and the new landscape system was added to the initial four ones, which are the environmental, settlement, socioeconomic, and superordinate planning systems. The numerous papers find, at the end of each system, a synthesis which aims to collect the crucial elements that emerged from the previous analysis, interpreting them as a whole. In these five maps, it was identified the opportunity to act according to the principles of regional design, entrusting to them that representative and restitutional mode of data to sketch the road to the future general variant. A brief description of this synthesis will be now given. So this synthesis, the one of environmental system, aims to identify the load-bearing structure of the territory, identified in this municipality in the frame composed by the Tyrrhenian Sea to the west and the mountainous arc to the northeast. Within this perimeter, numerous rivers and canals creep in and define the spaces, feeding a dense agricultural network and culminating in large bodies of water, among which Lake of Fondi stands out. The map aims to highlight all those components which, for their conformation, escape the rigid administrative borders, and for this reason have dignity to be studied and managed on a larger scale in concert with other municipalities and neighboring entities, also through innovative and participatory tools such as river and lake agreements. This elaboration, called settlement centralities, stems from the need to give dignity and identity to the very numerous agglomerations that have sprung up spontaneously in the territory. The settlement fabrics of this municipality, in fact, with the exception of Fondi, saw their major development only during the second half of the 1900s, mostly through illegal constructions. Today, these localities, despite the fact that they all carry with them the vice of no planning, gather with them multiple services and social centralities that are fundamental for those they live there. The synthesis of the settlement system therefore aims to represent the emergencies of this agglomeration, interpreting their urban morphology and the different social flows that pass through them, to align future planned action with the spontaneous action stratified over the years. As a synthesis of the socio-economical system, this map gathers the relational subplots that exist between the spheres of inhabitants and workers, and how these are interwoven in the network proposed by the local road system and the distribution of services and work areas. What emerges is a map capable of telling the gaps and the potentiality of specific areas, their degree of reachability and crossing ability, according to the concentration of areas on which different interests gravitate. The analysis aims to assist the municipality in identifying those areas in need of increased services or ways to reach them. By carefully analyzing the current municipality plan and the regulations indicated by superordinate plans, among which the regional landscape plan stands out in importance, the map assigns each area its own degree of coherence. The specific degree of coherence is generated from the reflections, which take the forecast of the municipal plan as a reference base, focus in particular on those not yet realized ones, and that today must necessarily be confronted with the new indication of the use of landscapes, with the presence of new constrained areas or areas that now are built up illegally. This analysis generates a reading of the territory that, on one hand, evaluates the current level of application of the municipal plan of 1978, and on the other hand, hierarchizes on a gradient of transformability the areas outside the plan forecasts. In order to close the system that has dealt with the graphic transposition of the rules that the landscape plan has introduced for the various landscape of Lazio, this synthesis report the municipality's land use hierarchized through semi-critical reading. Here, in fact, the various components are summarized according to the landscape to which they belong into elements to safeguard, elements to restore, and elements of risk. The need to produce this reading stemmed from the manifest difficulty in bringing into dialogue two urban planning instruments that the current municipality plan and the regional plan, which came into being almost 50 years apart. Moreover, the landscape plan, because of the limitation imposed by the vast scale in which it sets its studies, cannot count itself the claim to have studied the individual peculiarities of each area within the municipality, which has since addressed and absorbed the natural flows that traverse and transform every landscape. Intangible flows and bundles of tensions through which the landscape shapes and interrelates with its surroundings. Though intangible, they establish margin with which human and ecological processes relate continuously. This synthesis, called the mosaic of microlandscapes, intends to shape thus flows that, with uncertain margins and continuous overlaps, form the overall picture of the relationship that exists between the landscapes. This part of lecture, in fact, has no critical attitude, but exclusively interpreted ones, in which the flow's disturbance, interpreted as the level of relationship with other landscape types, densities, and diversification, is analyzed. In conclusion, I list and analyze the main objectives of this research, which can be summarized in the following 6.1. Regulatory compliance, which must research both in relation to the instruments already adopted and in view of the process in which an instrument such as the knowledge framework is inserted. Homogeneous restitution, in order to homogenize layers of information that, although open source or easily accessible, are found in different forms, scale, source, format, and consequently are not immediate communicability with each other. Scientific approach based on the systematization on the territory, which, thus compartmentalized, is easier to study. This also simplifies the next 2 points, which are communicability, to be entrusted to a language and representation capable of engaging even non-technical readers, and to be researched in a recognizable graphic format, and insightful as a constant and always expandable goal which finds in the subdivision into system a valuable aid to direct new research. Last one, interpretation, also expandable in innumerable forms, crucial both for providing insights and fields of discussion for future decision and the territory, but also during the research itself, which saw in the interpretive process an opportunity to reformulate or deepen other analyses. While the first 4 points can be said to be conclusive in their definition, homogeneous, unhomogeneous, coherent, incoherent, uncoherent, The last two, on the other hand, are objectives that can be said to always open to new elaboration and research, even stimulating the use of unconventional tools of analysis. Along these lines, it is therefore easy to imagine how crucial the contribution of other types of actors within the research process could be. So this will see itself enriched by the opinions and proposals of residents, professionals, students, or other administrative entities, who must be included in a participatory circuit consisting, for example, of roundtables, seminars, workshops, or other opportunities of enhancement and rethinking of the territory. Whether this is taken in its entirety or only a small part. In light of what just been exposed, we report as an example of possible good practice the experience of the thematic seminar organized by the authors of this lecture and held in Fondi this April together with 20 architecture students. Focused on the study and rethinking of the shoreline area, the project, devised among the students over a period of less 2 weeks, composed a palimpsest of new readings and ideas, extemporaneous and expeditious. This palimpsest, which nevertheless remains a didactic experience, represents for the municipality Fondi a reservoir of ideas, insights, and interpretation that in a future decision-making phase may prove decisive, thanks in this case to the particular filter of architecture students, thus trained to read the territory even in a short time. It will be useful now the interpretation of other kinds of actor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saverio. Thank you very much. I ask you if you have any questions for this research work. Okay, so we can move on. I kindly ask Mariolina Grasso to share her presentation. We move to neighborhood scale with speaking of a decision support system to organize and to plan refurbishment intervention in Old Town, in a city center.
Yes, Fabrizio, I'm sharing my screen. Just a moment.
Thank you, Mariolina.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect.
Let's start.
Okay. Sorry, just I'm trying to. Okay. So good morning, everyone. And so I'm starting presenting this research that was developed together with Professor Battisti and Professor Acampa from University of Florence, and by myself, of course, from University of Ravenna. And so the aim of the research was to define a methodology for assessing priorities among interventions in the historic center of Florence, going from the conservation to regeneration of its building heritage. So we started from individual building monitoring, and then we're moving on to study the condition of this building, of course, promoting the creation of joint construction sites as, of course, optimizing costs. Hence, we will see how the methodology allowed the selection of the areas suitable for regeneration, whose different transformation and alternatives, of course, are evaluated and prioritized. So before discussing about the methodology itself, I will focus on research project progression and framework. Here you can see the research progression starting from 1982, when Florence Whole City Center has been added on World Heritage Site list by UNESCO. and to make, of course, its safeguard more incisive and the heritage better protected and monitored. Also, UNESCO, since 2004, has recommended the adoption of a management plan to all the sites on its list. And the management plan follows an embedded strategies combining cultural heritage protection and conservation with the development needs. Of course, I'm referring, for example, to socioeconomic aspects of the area in order to guarantee choices sustainability. Following management plan, of course, other actions are needed. In particular, I'm referring to the preservation management and the participatory design. And of course, our contribution fits right in between the management plan and the preservation. So forest management plan as a progression over time, and to meet the needs related to the drafting, implementation, and monitoring of this plan. In 2005, the UNESCO office was set up within the municipality of Florence, and in 2006, the municipality of Florence approved the first management plan, and the second version was released 10 years later. And as you can see here, 5 critical issues were assessed, starting from, for example, tourist system management and heritage preservation and knowledge, mobility system, going on to commerce and other residents and big. So in 2022 was released the last version of the management plan, and of course it's important to highlight that these objectives were achieved as a result of the collaboration between the municipality of Florence, the UNESCO office, the University of Florence, and in particular by HERLAB, the Heritage Research Lab, and within the Department of Architecture, and of course, and also with the Muse Association. In 2022, another critical issue was added, a new one, and it was regarding the mobility system, and also it was made a better focus on environmental and climate change. So in 2018, it was also presented a monitoring plan. Monitoring plan is, of course, it's a fundamental part for the management plan. It's a fundamental part of the management plan. The last assigned fundamental phase, not for the management of the World Heritage Sites and for the implementation of the UNESCO requirements. And of course, this the monitoring plan was also achieved, was also produced by the as a result of the collaboration between the entities I mentioned before. And the monitoring plan is fundamental to guarantee the implementation, providing all the needed information to review, adapt, and eventually, of course, as you can see, the monitoring process of the management plan for the historic center of Florence is structured into the checking project consistency in terms of course, what respecting the mission of the site and the maintenance of its outstanding universal value, and checking project breakthroughs, establishing monitoring indicators and so on. And the monitoring plan drawn up in 2018 was updated in 2022, and it was monitoring 53 projects divided in 5 macro areas, And of course, it's this monitoring is carried out every 2 years. The methodology proposed in this work, in particular, focuses on the conservation and knowledge of monumental heritage actions, so the second one, as you can see, and aims to link 3 action projects within this second file, this presentation and knowledge. And this project were the Eco Colors project, which is an open data system for architecture of the historic center, and heritage impact assessment project, and the Florence heritage data. So we were analyzing these 3 projects. So once defined the research framework, now we can focus on the methodology developed, which systematically integrates several methods. Of course, defining an evaluation process in which both quantitative and qualitative data are collected and analyzed. Generally, these types of evaluation are mainly adopted when the answer to each question has more than one component requiring different evaluation methods. When there is an attempt is made to increase the accuracy and the consistency of the results. And also when there are several steps in the evaluation process and the results obtained by one method are useful for the next steps. So specifically in this paper, an experimental evaluation, it was made by 4 steps. And the first one was the definition of a degradation index, referring to each building as stand alone. And the second is the creation of an opportunity matrix, which relates possible intervention of different buildings of the block. The third is outline of possible regeneration intervention and evaluation of their impacts. And the fourth and last one was the application of multi-criteria analysis for the choice of the best hypothesis to comply with the objectives of the management plan. So the first step was to define the degradation index, which is a numerical indicator of the level of degradation of buildings, considering the elevations, prospects, and roofs. Its results, as you can see in the sum of the degradation index, both referring to roofs, and I'm referring to the DIR terms, and to prospect to DIP terms. It also has been added a factor considering the risk for human life, for example, when the building has prospects on public streets where possible detachment and or collapse of an element of the project may hit accidentally a person. Talking about the calculation of DIP and DIR, it is important to say that the ratio between AD and AT, it's regard to the degradation area, AD, is quantified as the amount of material missing from the surface. And AT is the total area of the elevation. AD instead is the factor that takes into account the type of degradation. Of course, its range value depends on the damage it may cause to the materials in terms of loss of historical and cultural value. And Kc is the weight factor, considering the importance of degradation in the sense of the complexity of restoration, for example, and maintenance operation, and the related intervention cost. So we also considering the cost. And its value, indeed, is the ratio between the cost of ordinary maintenance and the cost of complete material replacement. So the calculation of DI tot and its value can be implemented, for example, within the database that was created by the Eco-Colors project, which instead consider the degradation index as a function of level of elevation chromatics alteration. Here you can see the scale value of that can reach the DI. So the next step, the second one, was the calculation of building opportunity matrix. Usually, an intervention is considered necessary following a building by building analysis without considering the state of conservation of the surrounding area. The setting up of this opportunity matrix makes it possible to verify the common characteristics that would make an intervention on several buildings more convenient and advisable. Of course, by linking buildings together, costs are optimized and the restoration and reuse activities are concentrated according to economies of size and scale. Of course, when speaking of maintenance work, both at a technical or management level, must be considered that each technical element of a building is connected to other elements. This connection can be technological and operational. And as you can see, the matrix is made of rows and columns in which the buildings making up the blocks under consideration are added. Each quadrant resulting from the row column intersection is divided into 4 parts, forming 4 more triangles. That refers to the operational and technological connection. So considering the specific case, the operational connection was assessed by comparing the value of the DI tot, of the degradation total index, obtained from each of the 2 buildings under examination. And as you can see here, there is the scale of operational connection going from no operational connection to strong operational connection. And here instead you can see the legend for the technical connection, which takes into account the convenience of associating intervention on 2 buildings linked to the 2 reasons of structural and effective nature. And so here you can see the third step that regards the outlining possible intervention regarding, of course, the blocks. And so the goal of this phase is to outline multiple project alternatives. So an heritage impact assessment is conducted to strategically assess the corresponding potential impact on cultural heritage. So the last step was the application of a multi-criteria analysis. Of course, the multi-criteria analysis there are a lot of multi-criteria analysis. The most important thing is to choose the best, the one that fits the best the decision-making the problems to solve. So what we think it was important was the use of combined methodologies, so combined analysis, which are particularly useful for dealing with the complex situation and are capable of structuring more inclusive decision-making process regarding the field of cultural heritage. So about the conclusion, just a quick overview of what we have done. So we calculated this calculation index regarding the roof and the prospect of the building blocks. We define this matrix of opportunity for intervention and the different type of intervention. And then at the last step, with using multi-criteria analysis, we choose the best alternatives among, of course, the type of intervention selected. The novelty of the research stands in the fact that the method is easily exportable to other systems, for example, to other technical elements constituting the buildings. And of course, this these characteristics given the flexibility, and it's given by the flexibility and the generality of the individual methods. And of course, another important aspect is that the method disregards the analysis of the ownership of the buildings that characterizes the block. So, of course, just a last overview about the future development. Of course, the natural development of the research is based on its application over the case study. In this case, the case study was the historic center of Florence, as you can see in these images, and its buffer zone. In particular, we are focusing on the area called the Ladarno, so just under the Arno River. And so, having defined the general area, the application of the methodology first regards 3 blocks that we study, as you can see in these images. And of course, following this experimentation, it will eventually be possible to define any points or phases of the method that needs further implementation. So I'm over. Thanks for the attention. And if you have any question, of course, I'm here. I can hear Fabrizio. I'm sorry, I hear nothing. I don't know if you problem.
Angelina, do you hear us? Okay,
Yes,
we have questions. Not a technical, but about the gradation index, please.
About the gradation index, the question is that there are only 4 or 5 levels. Are these levels only based on the inspection of the degradation, or is any kind of measure, for example, more detailed surveillance of the material? It's just a visual measure. How do you determine the degradation index?
Do you hear the question, Mariolina?
Not so well, Fabrizio, if you can...
I can answer this question because I know this research. The question is, to build the degradation index, do you see only by... do you have made only a visual recognition of buildings, or you have made some specific investigations about materials? In this phase, just visual investigation, because this is the first step, but the methods can be used also with the more detailed investigation. The decision support system we built is useful for both of the experimentation, but in this case, for opportunity reason, we stop at visual recognition. Thank you for your question. Thank you, Mariolina. So we can move to the third presentation. I will have this talk because we don't have today Professor Pisano. Thank you for your support. Okay. Thank you very much. In this short talk, I present the Mondeggi Villa Estate Regeneration Project, a project followed on behalf of the Metropolitan City of Florence by the Departments of Architecture and Economics of Florence University, and which I present today as a case study of a way of understanding an equitable, non-extractive project. This work has been made by me and Professor Pisano and Professor De Luca, who is the director of the Department of Architecture of the University of Florence. And I'll show you some tables of this project, and I will try to explain our goal. First, a few words about the work. It's a very challenging project that has many levels of complexity. First of all, it is an extensive property because Mondeggi Villa Estate is a 172 hectares estate in Florentine Hills, composed mainly of wooded areas and areas planted with arable crops, olive groves, and vineyards, as you can see in these photos. Very amazing place with this ancient cultural heritage. And this villa is composed of 6 rural farmhouses of about 600 square meters each, and a late medieval villa of 4,000 square meters that belonged to the Gherardesca family until the 1940s of the last century. And this project falls under the so-called interinstitutional project, owned in the 1960 to the province, now metropolitan city of Florence is the owner today. And land falls in this municipality of Bagno Ripoli, Impruneta, Greve Chianti, so 1, 2, 3, 4 municipalities. And various ministerial decrees have constrained the various architectural emergencies, as well as numerous of the urban planning constraints from the metropolitan tool of land government, put landscape, and the condition so is very complex. And this project requires a very high level of governments. And in addition, we can say that since 2013, a group of occupants under the name of Mondeggi Bene Comune has settled in some of the farmhouse who were thought in illegality, have been actively engaged in reactivating some production, wine, oil, and bread, but without the consent of the owner, the municipality of the metropolitan city of Florence. And thus avoid the abandonment of land and farmhouses or the sale of the state, or the sale of the villa alone, which was the most likely option until 2 years ago. And this collective has activated a nationwide social network, drawing cultural and social interests and expectation to this area. Additional level of complexity in this framework provided by this map, and thanks to the opportunity of urban integrated urban program, a measure of PNRR, the Plan for Resilience in Italy, the metropolitan city of Florence decided to invest 52 million of the 157 planned by the means for Mondeggi project. And this obviously added 2 important levels of complexity, because the first one is the timing, because the project must be completed until June 2026. And the second, that is related to the first, is the construction of preliminary project, and now called the project for the technical and economic feasibility of this villa. And the instrument, now you can see the villa, an instrument that was created for infrastructure project and was ill-suited for such complex project. The instrument is inside the project for technical and economic feasibility. And we charged to overcome this limitation by transposing the general plan and its phases and the context toward a guiding plan approach capable of coordinating numerous of interventions. And going instead on the context of the project, in general, the ambition with which we have operated is to make Mondeggi a national example as a place able to host complex social processes that do not find space in other contexts, proposing the coexistence of different ways and rhythm of life between traditional and innovative agricultural production through agri-tech training at different levels, social and cultural activities, with the inclusion of each of the farmhouses of one or more associations called to manage the spaces for activities and attached residences. And the idea is that each of the 6 farmhouses could be earmarked for an association that will manage private co-living spaces and public spaces at the same time, for workshop or, for example, for agricultural processing, and that its activities will be subject to a social budget, scale erection and exchange between associations depending on activities, obviously. And the villa, on the other end, will be used for more institutional activities, agri-tech, undergraduate and postgraduate education, hotel, and ethical restaurant, maintain the cellars for wine processing and preservation, as today. Importantly, the entire estate will be subject to a single management on the holding foundation model, in which the state will have to have its own economic balance between profit and non-profit activities. So this is a sort of public-private partnership project. And we can see some of the plastic of our project in the slide. And in the slide, the scheme for metabolic approach applied in this project. And from here, some conclusions can be drawn with respect to this session. If for some entrusting the entire state to the Mondeggi Bene Comune Group to build their utopia would lead to the perfect social project. For others, economic enhancement, as happened in so many Medici villas, exempli Grazia Lappeggi, would have guaranteed economic sustainability and solve the problem. The project seeks a balance between these extremes. Investments will make the state self-sufficient in terms of energy and water. In this slide, you can see the metabolic approach applied in the project. And from the villas activities can come resources to offset the cost of activities aimed at social welfare. This is the way we intend the regeneration of this important cultural heritage. To conclude this presentation, I have to say that as University of Florence, we managed the trigger and defined some principles, which also seem to have been exposed by the administration. While waiting for the construction of a control room, we are publishing a book with the Florence University Press and an exhibition at Palazzo Medici Riccardi planned for October, where you are invited if you will in Florence in October. Thank you very much for your attention. I don't know if you have any questions. If you don't have any questions, I will upload the last presentation for this session. Okay. Perfect. environmental and landscape constraints and legislative provisions in territorial urban planning and building construction, impacts in urban regeneration, research work made up by me and Giovanna Campa and Mariolina Grasso. First of all, the contextualization of this research. In recent years, the regulations concerning land governance, urban planning, landscape, environmental and building regulation affecting settlement transformation have progressively become more and more substantial, complex. Settlement transformation, in fact, activity depends not only on provision of municipal rank, for example, general regulatory plan or technical regulation, but also on a complex system of national regional regulation and the discipline dictated by the operating constraints system dictated by various sector plans that have joint effectiveness and impose different level of administrative protection, being usually attributed to specific competence to public bodies that usually do this specific sector plan. Which are the effects of constraints on land transformation? Which is a constraint? A constraint is a protective tool which limits or regulates in detail the transformation of an area or a property. Only some constraints have the character of total impediment to any territorial and building transformation. A constraint in more cases is an element that creates precondition to operate in a land transformation and a building transformation. So both at the urban and building scale, tendentially, not univocally. The relationship between constraints and the territory is dynamic. The constraints regulatory framework constantly changes and updates, modifying the possibilities of intervention on an asset and its effects and produces effects when authorization process are not finished yet. Which are the open questions? Over the years, the complexity of regulation in territorial governance obviously has generated both a significant lengthening of the time required to obtain permits preparatory to the start of work and expanded to the business risk. The complex procedural process for approval of plans of project can in fact produce significant variations from the initial assumption on the basis of which intervention plans are often prepared and financial and economic evaluations correlatively carried out. The uncertainty that constraints, obviously when present, pose therefore characterizes, albeit in different measures, every single settlement transformation initiative. So, which is our aim, our objective, and the articulation we propose. We wanted to study the relationship between constraints and value of assets subject to regeneration, because value of an asset subject to regeneration is very important to understand if that asset can or cannot be refurbished. So it's very important to assess the real value considering the real risk on its urban regeneration initiative. So the goal is investigating the relationship between constraint aspects, regulatory corpus, and market value of a property that lends itself to real estate development initiatives. And the articulation of the proposed methodology is proposed taxonomy related to community and national, in our case study, Italian constraints affecting land transformation, but this methodology can be applied at the European level at least. Use analytic hierarchy process to weigh the importance of constraints in relation to their ability to affect a real estate development initiative, and obtain weights or coefficients that properly processed can provide useful insight into the specific discount rate for a real estate initiative falling within a constraint area. And the coefficients obtained can find in capital asset pricing model, and in particular participate in the determination of a sort of fictitious a dummy beta, a notional beta coefficient verification of this procedure, we have to say that it's in progress. So, which is the output? The output is a specific discount rate of the asset subject to regeneration, because considering the discount rate, the market value can be correctly estimated. So now I try to go fast. We have studied the constraints in European and Italian regulation. The main constraints in European regulation: important bird area, biodiversity area, site of community interest or site of community importance, special protection areas, wetland of international importance. And then we made a taxonomy of constraints that are in charge in Italy in this moment: landscape and environmental goods, hydrogeological constraints, sites of national interest, Nature 2000, regional areas, hydrological plan, and seismic hazard. So, how we decide to use analytic hierarchy process to weigh the constraints? Through a traditional application of this tool, with the goal of assigning an important index to national, in Italian case, constraints. So we use analytic hierarchy process to a pairwise comparison of constraints based on two evaluation criteria. To what extent does the constraints pose risks of slowing down the initiative? To what extent does the constraint pose risk of compromising the initiative? So the timing and the risk of compromising the initiative. So the implementation is a traditional hierarchy process. Then we use the weights that we found in the capital asset pricing model. Capital asset pricing model was studied by Sharp, Littner, and Mossin in 16 years of last centuries. And our aim is to assess beta based on asset, but this is not traditional beta, but a dummy beta. So, through the beta that is assessed using the weights obtained from analytic hierarchy process, it's possible to relate an average market return as a function of the riskiness associated with the asset. Its meaning, so by expressing the covariance between a single security and the entire market, it's provide the simplest measure of systematic risk and information of market volatility and liquidity. Beta Swiss risk index is a coefficient that has a practical use. So, can I determine a fictitious beta? Yes, we try. We are trying to test that it's possible, because how we can, in synthesis, we can find a dummy beta in a six-stage phase of our methodology. So we can summarize them. Phase one, as I said, analytic hierarchy process allows a weight to be assigned to each constraint. By processing these weights, dummy beta differential can be determined relatively to the risk they generate on its real estate transformation. So real beta max and beta min coefficients are sought with the reference to the financial real estate investment market, possibly real estate finance. So there is a sort of similarity between financial investment and real estate investment. So we have to know the maximum and the minimum ordinary beta in the financial market. So we proceed to construct the dummy beta. A component of the dummy beta is due to two constraints, and this component operationally and heuristically depends on the formula you can see in the slide. So we can implement the capital asset pricing model, determining the rate of return of a real estate initiative that is related to its risk. And the rate of return of the real estate development initiative is obtained in relation to its risk from constraint operating in the asset. And using the rate of return in the implementation, for example, of the traditional procedure to assess the market value or transformation of a capital is possible in this way to have a true discount rate and the real value that is related and with the risk of urban regeneration intervention. So the investor can have the real measure of the value of the building in which he or she decide to start a regeneration process. So this methodology simply help to have clear the assessment, the appraisal of market value of an asset that has to be subject to urban regeneration, considering its constraints. This methodology is now we are now applying this methodology in a case study, which is the municipal territory of city of Florence. Now we don't have yet the result of this experimentation. I have finished this presentation, so I thank you for your attention, and this session has been organized with Professor Acampa and with Professor Campo. Professor Acampa is online, and if Professor Acampa agree, I left the speech for the final speech of this session as co-chair of this session.
So I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
Just few words in conclusion of this session. That was very, very interesting, with very interesting intervention. I think that the topic on urban regeneration nowadays is one of the most relevant, especially in a European context where the soil consumption is a significant issue. And I want to stress the importance to involve different disciplines, and let me say and underline the key rule of evaluations. We saw in the intervents today how the evaluations were integrated in the design process, but I think that they should be always integrated in the design process. And I don't know if there are some questions about the topics that we discuss, but otherwise I think that we can conclude this section, and thank you all the authors and the colleagues that participate to the Congress and to this section.
Thank you to stay with us in this session. So if we don't have any questions, I think we can finish URITEM 2023.
To the next year.
To the next year. Thank you very much. Thank you, Saverio. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Giovanna. See you next time. We can close the connection.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you too.